Climate change is not a distant threat for Italy, but a harsh reality that is already affecting its people, economy, and environment. One of the most visible and devastating impacts of climate change is the increase in droughts, which have become more frequent and severe in recent years. Droughts are periods of abnormally low rainfall that result in water shortages for human and natural systems. They can have serious consequences for agriculture, energy production, public health, biodiversity, and social stability. Droughts can also increase the risk of wildfires, landslides, and floods. But how does climate change cause droughts? And why is Italy particularly vulnerable to them? To answer these questions, we need to understand how rainfall and evaporation are influenced by global warming. Rainfall is the main source of fresh water for most regions of the world. It depends on the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, which is determined by temperature and humidity. Warmer air can hold more water vapor than colder air, which means that global warming increases the potential for rainfall. However, this does not mean that rainfall will increase everywhere. The distribution and intensity of rainfall are also affected by atmospheric circulation patterns, which are driven by differences in temperature and pressure between different regions of the world. These patterns can change due to climate change, altering the frequency and location of wet and dry spells. For example, climate change can weaken the jet stream, a band of fast-moving winds that circles the northern hemisphere and influences weather systems. A weaker jet stream can cause weather patterns to become more persistent and extreme, leading to longer periods of drought or heavy rain in some areas. Evaporation is the process by which liquid water turns into water vapor and returns to the atmosphere. It depends on temperature, humidity, wind speed, and solar radiation. Higher temperatures increase evaporation rates, while higher humidity reduces them. Global warming increases evaporation by raising temperatures and enhancing solar radiation. However, it also increases humidity by increasing water vapor in the atmosphere. The net effect of these factors depends on local conditions and feedbacks. For example, higher evaporation can reduce soil moisture and vegetation cover, which can further increase temperatures and evaporation rates. This creates a positive feedback loop that amplifies drought conditions. On the other hand, higher evaporation can also increase cloud cover, which can reduce solar radiation and temperatures. This creates a negative feedback loop that mitigates drought conditions. Italy is a country with a diverse climate, ranging from Mediterranean to Alpine. It receives most of its rainfall from the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea, which are influenced by different atmospheric circulation patterns. In general, Italy experiences wet winters and dry summers, with regional variations depending on latitude, altitude, and proximity to the sea. However, climate change has altered these patterns in several ways. First, climate change has reduced the amount of snowfall in the Alps and the Apennines, which are the main sources of fresh water for northern and central Italy. Snow acts as a natural reservoir that stores water during winter and releases it during spring and summer through melting. Less snow means less water available for rivers, lakes, and aquifers. Second, climate change has increased the frequency and intensity of heat waves in Italy, especially in summer. Heat waves are periods of abnormally high temperatures that last for several days or weeks. They increase evaporation rates and reduce soil moisture, creating drought conditions. Third, climate change has altered the seasonal distribution of rainfall in Italy, making it more erratic and unpredictable. Some regions have experienced more dry spells in winter and more heavy rainfalls in summer, while others have experienced the opposite. These changes make it harder to plan and manage water resources. According to data from the European Environment Agency, EA, Italy has faced 12 major drought events between 1980 and 2020, affecting more than 40 million people and causing economic losses of over 10 billion euros. The worst droughts occurred in 2003, 2017, and 2022, when Italy received less than half of its normal rainfall. The EA also projects that Italy will face more frequent and severe droughts in the future due to climate change. By 2100, the annual number of drought days could increase by up to 80% in some regions, while the annual precipitation could decrease by up to 30% in others. These projections are based on scenarios that assume different levels of greenhouse gas emissions and mitigation actions. The higher the emissions, the worse the impacts. Therefore, reducing emissions is essential to limit global warming and its effects on droughts. However, reducing emissions alone is not enough to avoid droughts completely. Italy also needs to adapt to the changing climate by improving its water management practices and increasing its resilience to water scarcity. Some of the possible adaptation measures include increasing water efficiency and conservation in agriculture, industry, and households, promoting rainwater harvesting and wastewater reuse, enhancing groundwater recharge and protection, developing alternative sources of water supply, such as desalination, improving water quality monitoring and control, implementing drought early warning systems and contingency plans, raising public awareness and education on water issues, strengthening cooperation and coordination among different sectors and stakeholders. By implementing these measures, Italy can reduce its vulnerability to droughts and ensure its water security for present and future generations. The drought that has hit Italy in recent years has had devastating effects on the water supply, agriculture, energy production, and ecosystems in the country, especially in the south. The drought is caused by a combination of factors, including lack of rain, rising temperatures, and climate change. One of the most visible impacts of the drought is the reduction of water levels in rivers, lakes, and reservoirs. The Po River, the longest river in Italy and a vital source of irrigation and hydroelectric power, has dwindled to a trickle in some areas. Some towns have been rationing water for months, and some cities have shut off tap water during the night. The government has declared a state of emergency for much of northern Italy and allocated $37.5 million in relief funds for the affected regions. Another major consequence of the drought is the damage to agriculture, which accounts for about 2% of Italy's GDP and employs more than 1 million people. The Po Valley, which produces 40% of Italy's food, including rice, pasta, wine, and Parma ham, is among the worst hit areas. The drought threatens more than 30% of national agricultural production and half of the farms and livestock in the Po Valley. Farmers have been forced to reduce their crops or abandon some fields altogether. Some crops, such as tomatoes and grapes, have also suffered from lower quality and quantity due to heat stress and pests. The drought also affects energy production, as hydroelectric power plants depend on water flow to generate electricity. According to Terna, the company that manages Italy's electricity grid, hydroelectric production dropped by 20% in 2022 compared to 2021. This means that Italy has to rely more on fossil fuels and imports from neighboring countries to meet its energy demand, which increases greenhouse gas emissions and energy costs. Finally, the drought has negative impacts on ecosystems and biodiversity, as many plants and animals depend on water for their survival. Wetlands, forests, grasslands, and alpine habitats are all threatened by drought and wildfires. Some species, such as fish, amphibians, birds, and insects, are at risk of extinction or migration due to loss of habitat and food sources. The drought also affects human health and well-being, as it increases the risk of heat waves, dust storms, respiratory diseases, and conflicts over water resources. The drought that Italy is facing is not an isolated event, but a symptom of a larger problem: climate change. According to experts, climate change is making extreme weather events more frequent and intense in Italy and around the world. To prevent further disasters and adapt to the new reality, Italy needs to take urgent action to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions, conserve water resources, support farmers and communities affected by drought, and invest in renewable energy sources. Italy has been experiencing a series of extreme weather events in recent years, from heatwaves and droughts to floods and landslides. These disasters are linked to the climate crisis, which is making the country more vulnerable to the impacts of global heating. One of the consequences of the prolonged droughts that have affected Italy is the increased risk of flash floods and landslides, especially in the hilly and mountainous regions. This is because the soil becomes less able to absorb water when it is dry and compacted, and the vegetation cover is reduced by wildfires, deforestation, and agricultural practices. When heavy rain falls on these degraded lands, it quickly runs off the surface, carrying soil, rocks, and debris with it. This creates a powerful and destructive force that can sweep away anything in its path, including roads, bridges, buildings, and people. According to experts, Italy has recorded more than 120 landslides in the past year, some of them triggered by torrential rain. For example, in November 2022, 2 people died and several were feared missing after massive landslides and floods hit the island of Ischia in southern Italy. In May 2023, 13 people were killed and thousands were evacuated from their homes in northern Italy as rivers burst their banks after receiving half their average annual rainfall in just 36 hours. These events show how Italy's droughts have made the floods worse, exposing the country to a double threat from the climate crisis. To reduce this risk, experts suggest improving land management practices, restoring natural ecosystems, enhancing early warning systems, and increasing public awareness and preparedness.